Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're stepping into a backyard where dawn smells like smoke and memory, and every plant has an alibi. I'm Mara Whitfield, and before the birds finished clearing their throats, I watched my son strike a match over the 15-year garden. My husband, Henry, tended like a heartbeat. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I like seeing our little constellation of night owls. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan hum in the background. And let's begin tonight's journey together. The fire started small, like a rumor, the kind that wears pajamas and thinks it won't be caught. I came to the kitchen window with my mug and found the herb beds flashing orange, thyme confessing more than it owed, rosemary lifting its green wrists as if to say, I object. Calvin stood near the compost heap with a can of accelerant and the stance of a man auditioning for efficiency. It's dead money, Mom, he called, as if the peonies could hear him. Stonebridge Commercial will buy the lot faster if we clear it. You don't need all this. Dirt. Henry called the soil library. Every trowel mark a footnote. He kept a ledger of planting dates in pencil because, he said, gardeners should be able to erase regret. Calvin never learned that language. He speaks in closings, not seasons. I walked outside and the heat folded around me with that blunt sincerity fire always has. Put it out, I said softly, because soft is better for aim. Now? He laughed without consulting his lungs. I've got it under control. He kicked at a ring of sparks control in boots. We can list next week. Stonebridge has cash. Paige says if we move quick, they'll waive inspections. Odd fact of the morning, certain soils go hydrophobic after firewater beats and skitters off like the ground has decided it's not thirsty anymore. I watch the hose do its thin silver miracle and the ash shrug at it. That's when I took the can from his hand, the way mothers take car keys from teenagers, gently. As if gravity were a fragile agreement. Your father spent 15 years here, I said. He kept bees that minded their business. He named tomato varieties like saints. This is not dead money, this is continuity. Calvin spread his arms to the mulch like a game show model, revealing a new refrigerator. Continuity doesn't pay taxes. Mom, the buyer wants a clean slate. We can move you to a condo with elevators and a gym and neighbors whose names I'll never learn because we don't meet at the fence. I finished. I have a gym. It's called a wheel. My brain, bless it, reached for wheelbarrow and brought back garden stroller. I stood there, half-armed with syllables, until the proper noun ambled home. Wheelbarrow. Intellectual aging event completed. Dignity mostly intact. A wheelbarrow, I said. And the handle in the shed tried not to look smug. The flames realized they were losing the argument and settled down to sulk. A patch of char steamed near Henry's compost corner, his favorite sermon. If you could measure devotion by how well someone turns a heap with a pitchfork, Henry was priestly. Calvin had raised that hill of future, too. Down to a wet black grin. Something about the soil there looked interrupted. A neat rectangle of darker dirt. A scoop that didn't match the rhythm. The ground keeps secrets poorly. It was trying to tattle. Mom, Calvin said, switching to a voice that wants signatures. Paige booked Stonebridge for Friday. Demo crew Monday. I'll handle everything. You shouldn't be out here. It's not safe. He glanced at the hose in my hand, at my slippers, at the lilac whose leaves were writing insult in cursive. It's not age appropriate. Neither is arson, I said. 3 jokes, taped to my ribs so my lungs would keep their union shift. If efficiency were a cologne, Calvin had over-applied. If Rosemary had a lawyer, she'd have filed an injunction. If a hose had a resume, de-escalation specialist would be in bold. The ash settled its gray, and the bees, poor accountants of chaos, tried to do inventory on smoke. I walked to the compost corner and knelt where the soil had a memory. The rectangle was exactly the size of a shoebox, and Henry had loved literal metaphors. He kept every pair of work boots until the heels confessed to gravity. He kept the boxes, too, for reasons. Reasons apparently like this. I slid my hand in and met cardboard that traveled well. The lid wore duct tape like a faded sash. Across the top, in Henry's shaky hand from his last month on Earth, a note for Mara if fire ever comes. I didn't gasp. Grief had already vacuumed my theatrics. I tucked the box into the shade of the lilac and turned to Calvin, who was texting like someone auditioning for the role of decisive. "You'll want to call Paige," I said. "Tell her we're pausing." His thumbs kept their little parade. "I'm not pausing. This is my inheritance too. Your father's will didn't say to set the mint on fire." He rolled his eyes in the ancient dialect of sons. "You're emotional. Paige says Stonebridge will make a generous as-is offer if we sign before the month ends." Academic phrase of the day. Broken windows theory. The public debate that says visible neglect invites more neglect. Invisible care discourages harm. Calvin believed scorched earth made money. Henry believed tended ground made neighbors. I've learned whose theories wear better boots. Calvin pocketed his phone, gestured at the blackened beds like a prosecutor. "This looks bad," he said. "Buyers don't like complicated. Paige says developers want clean lines. No, history." "Then perhaps we won't sell to developers," I said. "Perhaps we'll grow history on purpose." I looked around at the singed hedges, at the trellises Henry taught to stand, at the beehives humming a low, offended hymn. "Perhaps we'll restore." He laughed again, softer, because mockery is exhausting. "You can't maintain this alone." "Watch me," I said. Elder wisdom of the morning. The difference between a dare and a promise is where you put your breath. I filled mine with lilac and ash and something stubborn that remembered how Henry sharpened pruners slow. Equal strokes. No flourish. Calvin tried again, grasping for paperwork. "Paige is bringing contracts this afternoon. She has a notary. We can be done. Please route everything through council," I said. "And email me the PDFs with exhibits." The word tasted like a fence post. I'm not a lawyer, but I've lived long enough to respect nouns. He stared. "Since when do you have counsel?" "Since fire." I lifted the shoebox slightly, not showing, just reminding myself that weight can be comfort. "Since you taught me I'll need better sentences." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The way a man does when he realizes the role he was playing doesn't have the next line written. "I'll be back at 2, he said, retreating toward the gate. "Don't do anything. You'll regret." "I plan to regret things on a schedule." I said, 2 is fine." He left. Silence climbed back onto its chair. I carried the shoebox inside and set it on Henry's work table, a slab of oak he'd sanded until it learned to forgive. The tape lifted with the sigh of a habit being broken. Inside a ledger, a flash drive taped into a birthday card, a folded letter with my name. and tucked along one edge. A garden plan sketched in pencil, the spring beds labeled like a map for a pilgrim who refuses to ask for directions. The letter's first line had Henry's old joke: "If you're reading this, it means I've either become bad at time management or you've become very good at finding things." Then the sentences turned. He wrote of hospital bills he hid so I wouldn't spend my mornings balancing fear. Of small transfers Calvin made for the business that never quite returned. Of a rainy day portfolio he'd opened in my name, only modest, careful, untouched. "If fire ever comes," he wrote, "look under the roots. Some things we bury because we're ashamed. Some we bury because we're living long enough to surprise ourselves later." I wiped my eyes with the back of a wrist that still smelled like smoke. The ledger recorded plantings and yields, sure, but also dates and amounts checks to cash that weren't for seed, temporary wires that stayed gone, ATM withdrawals labeled with restaurants I've never eaten in. Henry's handwriting never accused, it suggested. He'd circled entries like a man circling sentence fragments. Finish this before it injures the paragraph. 3 more jokes. Because breath appreciates coworkers. If a flash drive had a personality, this one was a librarian who shushed even the dust. If a ledger could hum, Henry's would pick a key, the bees approve. If Page's notary wore a cape, I'd ask to see a license from the Bureau of Dramatic Stamps. I printed one thing before 2, a sign for the gate. Blue tape already cheering. Appointments only. No on-site signings. All offers in writing. I added a second line for my future self. Bring water, breathe. Then I called Detective Olivia Reyes at the precinct. Left a calm message: a woman learns after fire, I'm safe. There was a controlled burn that wasn't controlled. I may need to file a report if property gets pressured. No rush, I'll email details. When 2 o'clock came, so did Page heels, toad, and a smile that had practiced in a reflective surface. "I love what you've done with the place," she said, stepping around ash that didn't love her back. Calvin shadowed her like an exclamation point waiting for a noun. She set a glossy folder on the porch table. "I brought a purchase agreement from Stonebridge Clean. As is quick close, generous relocation allowance. We can get you somewhere with elevators and a gym," I said. "I believe I've heard the tour." I did not open the folder. "Please email the PDFs," I said, "with exhibits. I'll review with counsel." Page's smile tightened half a notch. "We can do it right here," she said, flipping pages that smelled like toner and hurry. "It's all standard." I looked at the lilac. It refused to participate. "Standard is a myth invented by people in a hurry," I said. "We're gardeners. We like seasons." Her gaze flicked to Calvin, then back to me. "This offer expires at 5. "So do some sunsets," I said. "I haven't found a way to speed them up without ruining the light." The day decided to be on my side. A bee bumped my shoulder and then thought better of it. A neighbor coughed behind a fence in that theatrical way communities do when they're listening and pretending not to. I held Page's folder until the paper remembered who paid whose mortgage, then set it down unread. Email. I repeated. And the hose. Still coiled by the compost. Looked like a punctuation mark I could use if necessary. Calvin made one last attempt at the tone adults use with toddlers. "Mom." "Calvin," I said, "bring water and gloves tomorrow at 9. We're sifting the ash. If you want to inherit this soil someday, learn to respect it now." He stared at the sign on the gate, at the hose, at the lilac, and at me. "You can't keep this up." "Watch me," I said again, and this time my breath didn't shake. They left, The garden, scorched and insulted, breathed around me. I gathered the ledger and the letter, slid the flash drive into my pocket like a polite weapon, and turned the hose on low. Hydrophobic soil twitched once, then decided to forgive. I walked a slow rectangle, watering as if apologies could be absorbed through roots. Maybe they can. Inside, I labeled a new folder Garden Receipts and Roots. I tucked Henry's plan inside, added a page for calls made, forms filed, and wrote today's date with the steadiness of a woman who knows where the wheelbarrow lives. The fan hummed, the kettle clicked. The house decided I could be trusted to stay. I let the hose whisper over the char until the soil stopped flinching. Inside, the shoebox sat on Henry's oak work table like a guest who'd brought both dessert and a confession. I slid the flash drive out of the birthday card he'd taped it in with the same care he used on grafting tape and carried it to the old laptop that serves as my filing cabinet with opinions. My first intellectual aging event arrived right on schedule. Where's the skinny rectangle mouth, I muttered. Staring at the side of the machine, my brain offered charger hole and card slot like two very confident wrong answers. Then, with a huff from somewhere near my thymus, USB port returned to the party. Dignity intact, vocabulary supervised. I clicked the drive in and waited for the computer to do its little courthouse cough. The folder opened like a drawer. Garden ledgers, house files, receipts, C, Calvin's initial. My stomach observed. Portfolio Mara, recordings. I started with the file named Read Me First, PDF because I was married to an engineer and I honor instructions. Henry's voice appeared on the screen in Courier New. If you're here, fire came literal or metaphorical. Don't panic. Start with the ledgers. When you're steady, open Portfolio Mara and call the advisor listed there. Everything is titled only in your name. Calvin has made withdrawals for the business that were supposed to come back. They didn't. I flagged dates. If you decide to confront, do it with paper. If you decide to forgive, do that with paper too. There was a P.S. If Paige brings a notary, offer her tea and ask for a PDF with exhibits. People who hurry forget their verbs. Odd fact of the day, some seeds actually wake up when they smell smoke compounds in smoke water, carrichinolide. I googled tell them the canopy's open and it's time to try. Not everything that burns is loss. Sometimes it's invitation. Elder wisdom of the day, invitation is not obligation. Just because something sprouts doesn't mean you owe it the whole yard. I opened Garden Ledgers. Henry had scanned his little pencil notebook's dates, varieties, harvest weights. Who took home extra tomatoes? Mrs. Peña got the most. She brings back empanadas. And we reward reciprocity around here. In the margins were numbers completely unlike basil counts check images. Bank stamps, deposits, and withdrawals that didn't wear gardening clothes. He'd circled certain entries with the tenderness of a man who refuses to harden truth to make it simpler. $480 ATM C, to the $900 wire to Calvin for equipment. $740 dinner at Craft House C +3. There were no arrows to anger, just circles to focus my eyes. Okay, I told the table. Paper, then breath, then more paper. I opened Portfolio Mara and met an account statement with my name alone at the top. Modest but real. Invested like a person who believes in Tuesdays. A note. Call Asha Reddy at Pine and Wren Advisory. Password hint, eels, your lilacs cultivar. My second intellectual aging event ambushed me with botanical trivia I've bragged about for a decade and promptly misplaced. I heard my mouth say, "It's the one with the French-sounding sensation." The name arrived like a neighbor with a spare key, Syringa vulgaris sensation. I typed sensation and the portal opened like a gate that likes who you are. I called Asha ready and told her 3 sentences with no adjectives. Henry died. He left this account in my name. I'd like to confirm custody and freeze any standing instructions. Asha's voice had the unflappable kindness of someone who has seen markets and humans misbehave. Mrs. Whitfield. I'm sorry about Henry. Yes, the account is yours alone. I see small scheduled transfers to checking and no beneficiaries listed. I'll email a simple form to add a trusted contact and set up a 2-factor code. The phrase 2-factor took a second to land. My brain briefly handed me double flavor like it was ordering ice cream. I wrote 2FA = second proof. Not dessert in the margin and felt 10 years more modern. Academic phrase of the day, loss aversion. The public argument that we hate losses about twice as much as we like equivalent gains. It's why Calvin can torch a garden to avoid losing a quick sale, and why I have to keep my hands on nouns when my feelings want a closing statement. The debate part is whether we overcorrect and make bad trades with our fear. I'm going to try not to. Detective Olivia Reyes called back while Asha's email buzzed in. Reyes's voice carries the competence of someone who irons her shirts and her syntax. Got your message. Are you safe? Yes, I said, just smoky and disappointed. She took notes like a stenographer at a family reunion. You're doing the right things, no on-site signings, communications in writing, PDFs with exhibits. If Paige or Calvin escalates, call me and we'll start a custodial interference report if they try to move you or a harassment log if they won't leave. She offered a gentle throat clearing. And if you find evidence of financial exploitation, check images. Transfers, you can file an elder financial abuse complaint. That doesn't make you a bad mother. It makes you literate. I liked her a lot then. I asked if I could hand over a copy of Henry's drive. Not the only copy, she said. Make a duplicate. Bring me the duplicate in a clear bag. We'll log it. Barcode, chain of custody, no statements yet. Paper first. We synchronized, watches her phrase, and hung up with the kind of politeness you keep when your life is about to require witnesses. 3 jokes pinned behind my ribs so lungs would clock in. If 2-factor authentication were a pastry, I'd order it no frosting, extra codes. If USB ports had a dating profile, it would say no, not that way. If Courier knew charged rent, Henry's notes would still be affordable. At 1:40, Paige emailed the clean standard agreement, standard war lipstick, and the smell of toner. I set it to print and told the machine it was doing great. The draft tried every trick Calvin's efficiency adores as is. Relocation allowance contingent on immediate access. Routine corrections to title at seller's expense. And a little snake half buried in the underbrush, a clause assigning any and all development rights, including transferable credits and incentives, which, if you've never fallen asleep on a city planning commission YouTube stream like I have, can turn air into money while quietly removing trees. Exhibit B easements existed. Exhibit C deeds was blank. The place where mischief goes to tuck in its shirt. I hit forward to Asha and to a new contact attorney, Priya Shah, at the neighborhood legal clinic. Victor's cousin used her when a landlord tried to sell the roof while keeping the rent. This city is creative. Priya answered in 6 minutes with kitchen table authority. We will reply with a red line. Do not sign. No on-site notary. We'll also send a litigation hold letter to Stonebridge Preserve emails, drafts, texts with Paige, Calvin. If they ask why, say, because paper behaves better than memory. She closed with a tiny flourish I could have hugged also. Your Exhibit C joke made my paralegal's day. Keep it coming. I made a duplicate of Henry's drive label, Henry, copy, for PD, and slipped it into a clear zip bag like a nurse tucking in an IV. Chain of custody gets cranky if you feed it drama. I fed it labels instead. Then I opened recordings, 3 files, Cal 0704 M4A, page notes, M4A, garden kitchen, M4A. I put in earbuds and pressed play on garden kitchen. Henry's voice, breathy from the month the deceased learned his name Mara. I recorded this in case I chickened out of a hard conversation. Calvin's been taking. Not always with bad intentions, often with lazy ones. If you choose to press charges, I'll have your back by paper. If you choose another discipline distance, conditions, I'll have your back by paper then too. The garden is yours. The soil is a library. Don't let anyone burn the books. I sat very still. I let the kettle click. When my breath returned with its hat in its hands, I pressed play on Cal 0704. Calvin again. From some July barbecue I don't remember, making jokes about liquidating the chicken coop and telling someone he had mom on the glide path. His voice wasn't evil, it was immature. That's more dangerous sometimes, because it thinks apologies are coupons you can reuse. I printed a sign for tomorrow's ash sifting, bring gloves. Bring water. Bring honesty. I added a smaller one below. No phones on the beds. You cannot scroll and respect at the same time. I am not taking votes on that. By late afternoon, the bees had resumed their normal union schedule. I walked the beds in a slow rectangle and made a triage list: rakes, sieves, buckets, heavy-duty contractor bags for the ash double-bagged. I could hear Henry instructing. On the way to the shed, I had a vocabulary lapse that made me laugh at myself. Where's the long-handled dirt comb? I asked the universe, miming forked metal in the air. My brain, delighted, presented pitchfork, and I curtsied to the tool like it was royalty. Later, I wrote dirt comb equals pitchfork on an index card and taped it inside the cabinet, just to keep my future dignity hydrated. Paige texted at 5:02 p.m. to say the offer expired at 5, but that Stonebridge could make exceptions for motivated sellers. I replied with 4 words that have become my porch light. Please route through counsel. Calvin followed with, "You're making this hard," I typed. "Boundaries are not hostility, and put the phone face down." I set out 3 mugs for morning mine. Calvin's, a spare for honesty. I printed Priya's red line and clipped it with the good binder clip, the one that could hold up a trellis if you asked nicely. I put the duplicate drive by the door to take to Detective Reyes and tucked Henry's original back into the shoebox the way you return a sleeping baby. 3 last jokes, so sleep shows up on time. If notaries wore capes, mine would say PDFs, not porches. If wheelbarrows had podcasts, episode 1 would be "We carry what you meant." If Rosemary could text, she'd have messaged Paige unsubscribe. I turned off the lamp, left the fan on low, and let the house do its night math fridge humming. Ash cooling, bees dreaming of civics. Tomorrow we sift, not for gold, but for roots. For nails the crew left. For the little labels Henry wrote in pencil so he could erase regret. We'll keep what belongs to us. We'll bag what doesn't. We'll water what says yes. And we'll put it all on paper. Because paper doesn't forget in a fight. At 8:59 a.m., I set 3 mugs on the porch rail and a 4th for the truth. Calvin arrived at 9:07, late enough to perform control, early enough to claim virtue. He wore brand new gloves like a costume. No phones on the beds. I reminded, pointing to the sign. He pocketed his screen with the sigh of a man surrendering a sword made of pixels. I handed him a rake and a sieve. My first intellectual aging event of the morning showed up wearing sawdust. Pass me the wire square that sifts, I asked. My brain offered fence pancake creative. Wrong then screen thing closer before presenting hardware cloth like a magician revealing a coin behind my ear. Dignity intact, vocabulary supervised. We set the hardware cloth in a wooden frame Henry built the winter he stopped pretending he didn't love jigs. Odd fact of the day, wood ash is alkaline. Rich in potassium and calcium, too much will push soil pH into attitude and lock up nutrients. Translation, even good things are ruinous in bulk. Ask anyone who's ever tried to fix a relationship with a shopping spree. We raked ash into the sieve, shook, and watched cinders fall like gray snow that didn't believe in childhood. Mrs. Peña appeared at the gate with empanadas and the kind of moral support that wears an apron. I brought snacks for the truth, she said, stepping around scorched thyme like a woman crossing a border with credentials. She gave Calvin a look grandmothers learn from galaxies. You will carry the heavy bags. He carried the heavy bags. We worked in quiet that meant something. The bees, insulted but professional, resumed payroll. In the compost corner, Henry's cathedral, we found nails. The melted ghost of a plastic trowel, and a handful of the little wooden labels he wrote in pencil so he could erase regret, Roma, Brandywine, charred Swiss, not rainbow, ask Mrs. P. I tucked them into my pocket the way you rescue pressed flowers from a 6th grade dictionary. Academic phrase of the day, escalation of commitment. The public argument that says, once we invest in a bad decision, we invest more to avoid the pain of admitting it's bad. Calvin had already bought fire. Now he wanted to double down with a clean sale. My job was to offer a cheaper exit ramp called paper. Why are we saving this junk? He asked, shaking the sieve like a tambourine. Because something in here belongs to us and something doesn't, I said. And because your father left breadcrumbs, we are reading. He smirked. Breadcrumbs burn. Not all of them, I said, tipping the frame. A dull thunk answered from below. The kind of sound wood does not make. We set the sieve aside. I knelt and pressed my palm to the ground the way you check a sleeping child for fever. The compost's underlayer gave back the temperature of surprise. I raked ash away and met a smooth, light gray concrete that didn't belong to last summer. The edges were too clean. The finish too proud. Calvin frowned. We never poured. Your father did, I said, brushing until a steel ring showed itself like a punctuation mark, a recessed handle. Paint the color of dirt. Henry loved literal metaphors and good hardware. We straightened like synchronized owls. Trapdoor, Calvin asked, half thrill, half dread. Root cellar, maybe, I said, because sentences are calmer when you let them start small. I knocked. The slab returned a hollow echo from a space that expected air. We don't open this without witnesses, I added. already reaching for my phone. Chain of custody isn't just for cops, it's for families who've run out of pretending. Detective Olivia Reyes picked up on the second ring. I kept my voice in the register reserved for bake sales and indictments. We found a concealed concrete hatch under the compost. Clean pour, steel ring, touch nothing, she said. Photograph everything. I'll bring a tech and a body cam. 30 minutes. I texted attorney Priya Shah the same photo with the same sentence. No entry until counsel present. Priya responded with a surgeon's thumbs up and blue taped the perimeter and write the time on it. We taped a rectangle. Mrs. Peña reading the numbers like a bingo caller. 9:51, she said. And if anyone falls in, I'm telling St. Peter, you tripped over your pride. Calvin rolled his eyes, but his hands were steady. I handed him water because descent hydrates better with cups. 3 jokes to keep my lungs clocked in. If hardware cloth had a personality, it would be the school librarian who lets you whisper as long as you return everything. If Ash had a resume, it would list makes pH decisions without consulting tomatoes. If concrete could text, Henry's would say new number. Who this and send a winking emoji. While we waited, I retrieved Henry's ledger and the shoebox note. Calvin watched my face the way sons watch weather. Did Dad leave you? Money, he asked, voice aiming for casual, landing near contrition. He left me instructions, I said, and receipts. I passed him a page with 3 circled withdrawals in his initial, small enough to excuse, numerous enough to illustrate. He blanched. I was going to return it. I finished. Yes. The future had other plans. We will write new ones. He leaned on the rake like a man who has met gravity. I didn't think fire would matter. Developers want dirt, not flowers. They want everything, I said, including words you do not understand yet, like air rights and transferable incentives and variance. They will turn your sky into coupons and sell them back to you. He stared. That's not how ask Paige to define exhibit, I said gently. If she says, we'll fill it in later. Tell her we grow our own nouns. Detective Reyes arrived with a slim officer, a kit, and a calm that made the air sit up straighter. Body cam on. She photographed the slab, the ring, our blue tape timestamp, our faces. Thank you for not improvising, she said, examining the pour. Recent, smooth, likely hand-finished. Your husband, Henry, I said. He kept secrets like heirlooms useful, not malicious. Okay, she said. We'll open and clear for hazards gas, wiring, critters with lawyers. Her tech slid a fiber optic camera through the ring's keyway and narrated like a nature documentary, void space, shelf, plastic totes, paper boxes. No obvious lines, no movement. Reyes nodded. Let's lift. Calvin and the tech took the ring and I took the corner with a gloved hand because dignity sometimes needs leverage. The slab rose on hidden hinges with the slow complaint of a piano lid in a church that still loves hymns. Cold, dry air sighed out, no chemical bite, no sewage story, just the quiet of a room that has been listening. A short set of steps disappeared into a space the size of a small shed. Reyes went first, mask on, light out. Every movement recorded, clear, she called. Come see. We descended into the room under roots, shelves on 3 walls, a steel safe in the back, a workbench with a portable fan, and 3 crates labeled in Henry's careful hand, tax paid, house, Calvin. My second intellectual aging event of the day arrived when I pointed to the safe. We'll need the spinny number circle. The text spared me and said, dial, or a locksmith. I wrote dial wheel of fortune on my downline because humor keeps blood sugar steady. Reyes photographed every label, every spider web, the way the dust lay where no one had walked in months. We'll log this as a found concealed storage, she said. It's still your property. But until we know what we're looking at, we touch with gloves. We log with pens. Chain of custody even for families. It saves feelings later. We started with house warranties. Permits, the original survey, receipts for the solar panels Henry saved up for by refusing to buy the fancy chocolate I liked. I forgave him, finally, aloud. Tax paid held exactly what it promised. Returns in neat folders, canceled checks, photocopied receipts, a letter Henry wrote to himself titled, "If Audit Comes," that made me laugh and cry at once. We set Calvin on the bench and opened it with the delicacy you reserve for truths that haven't decided who they'll hurt. Inside printed bank statements with Calvin's name. A ledger taped inside the lid in Henry's hand loans to Calvin dates, amounts, promised return, and a little digital voice recorder labeled Porch 618. Calvin put a hand to his forehead like the sun had changed teams. That was going to turn me in. Or give you a syllabus, I said. Sometimes those look alike. Reyes bagged the recorder in a tamper evidence sleeve and asked if I consented to a duplicate. Yes, I said. Original stays with me for now. Duplicate for you. The tech made 2 copies to twin drives he'd labeled in front of us. We signed the seals like adults who know pens are better than memories. Procedural justice, not sexy, but breathtaking if you like sleeping. 3 jokes, because lungs prefer apartments with light. If root cellars had Yelp pages, ours would read quiet, well-organized, 5 stars for labeling. If tamper-evident bags were people, they'd make excellent babysitters. If dials had egos, they'd all insist on being called combination artists. We climbed back to the sun with our dignity and our receipts. Reyes left us her card and the kind of warning that loves you. If Paige shows with a notary and a smile, tell her the city respects scheduled rooms. If Calvin pressures you, text me the word ash, I'll know. Calvin flinched. I'm not. Today you aren't, Reyes said. Not unkind? Keep it up. When they were gone, we stood over the open hatch like 2 people looking into a mirror that tells the truth while still wanting you to succeed. I wanted to fix things fast, he said. Voice small. Sell. Get you safe. Safety is a schedule, I said. You can help by keeping it. He nodded, and something about the set of his shoulders suggested he might finally be interviewing for adulthood. What now? Now, I said, we make copies. We drink water. We return at 2 with labels. We let Priya and Reyes teach us how not to ruin evidence with enthusiasm. And we rake another square because gardens don't rebuild themselves. I taped the hatch handle with blue tape and wrote, sealed 11/23, like a promise. Inside, the room waited. Above, the bees resolved a territorial dispute with less litigation than most humans. I pressed the palm of my hand to the concrete, feeling the cool conviction of Henry's last design choice. He had poured a room under a compost heap and trusted me to find it. I had. And I had witnesses. Elder wisdom of the day. Secrets are best built like root cellars, useful, ventilated, documented, and findable by the person who needs them, not the one who hurries. We got back to sifting. The ash gave us one more label, cucumbers armored, that made me laugh hard enough to scare a bee. I tucked it into my pocket with the others and thought, with a steadiness I had not owned yesterday, this will take time. But time is what gardens use to humiliate hurry. By noon, the ash had settled into something less theatrical, and the hatch wore its blue tape seal like a sensible bracelet, sealed 11/23. I made sandwiches that remembered who taught me mustard, and called 3 people in this order: Priyasha attorney, Asha Reddy advisor, Hector Morales locksmith recommended by Detective Reyes. No rush, but also not never. I told each. The kettle clicked its agreement. Hector arrived with a tidy van and the posture of a man who apologizes to doors before he persuades them. Detective Reyes met him on the path with her body cam already blinking politely. We open, we log, we breathe. She said, "No heroics." Odd fact of the afternoon, safe locks aren't picked like in movies. Most modern ones are defeated by dialing discipline, or if all else fails, by drilling a precise, tiny hole to read the wheel with a scope, then plugging and rekeying. Surgery, not demolition, Hector said, patting the safe the way a vet steadies a nervous horse. We rolled the slab back, descended to the room under roots, and let the cool air calm everyone's adjectives. Hector set a light, laid out a velvet pad, and took the safe's front in as if it had asked for a portrait. Group 2M, mechanical, he murmured. Obstinate, not impossible. He spun the dial with a tenderness I reserve for bread dough. In 5 minutes he paused, frowned, then grinned. Your husband was a gentleman, he said, giving the dial a final spin. The bolt retracted with the softest yes I've ever heard from metal. My first intellectual aging event of the afternoon ambushed me at the threshold. Hand me that yellow envelope, I said, pointing. My brain graciously offered Banana Folder a chaos adjacent to the truth before restoring Manila to the shelf where it belongs. Dignity intact, vocabulary supervised. We logged Manila No. 1 Trust Estate, Manila No. 2 House Garden, envelope audio, and a slim USB wrapped in masking tape labeled backup ledgers as if the drive upstairs might catch a cold. Manila No. 1 held a short letter, Henry's printing steady for 3 paragraphs, then traveling in little waves. Mara, you get 2 options and 1 spine. Option A, prosecute if Calvin's taking turned into stealing. Option B, don't prosecute, set conditions and distances, and make him earn back nouns like key. Saturday. Sun. Either way, spine, eel, paper. I've placed a modest trust at Pine and Wren in your name only. Asha knows. I've documented everything I could name without becoming cruel. Cruelty is off-brand for us. He'd clipped in a list loans to Calvin. Promissory notes unsigned, he kept saying tomorrow. Copies of checks. A 1-page garden covenant he'd drafted and never filed language about keeping the lot a pollinator corridor. About neighbors with access to herbs. About a hose rule no one blasts a bed because they're in a mood. Priya arrived while we were still inventorying and slid into the doorway with courtroom calm and porch manners. We'll scan, log, give Reyes duplicates, and leave originals with you, she said, handing me a red welt labeled garden room under roots in handwriting that made my pulse behave. Reyes logged chain of custody stickers on the audio and backup USB. And Hector rekeyed the safe with new numbers that only my hands know. "Write it down and hide it like a good recipe," he said, grinning. I wrote it twice, once for my head and once for the future with a headache. Academic phrase of the day: endowment effect, the public debate where people value what they already own more than what they could acquire, even when the trade would be rational on paper. Watch any toddler defend a wooden spoon to the death. Watch a developer defend air rights they've never met. Watch me stand over a scorched herb bed and know it's still worth more than a clean check because the bees have the deed in a language you can't file. The critique, of course, is that endowment effect makes us cling to junk. The nuance is learning which junk is actually a library. We climbed into the kitchen for scanning and tea. Priya set pages under the glass with a rhythm that belongs in a metronome museum. Reyes labeled the duplicates with barcodes and a smile that meant we were saving future arguments from having to shout. Asha called mid-scan 2 factors active. Your portfolio's trust overlay is refreshed. And I've added, me as your trusted contact doesn't touch money. Just rings alarm bells if something weird tries to walk in. Also, can I send you a class on fraud alerts versus credit freezes? Yes, I said, writing credit freeze in the margin and adding a star shaped like relief. Then, because sometimes mercy looks like listening to something you don't want to hear, we played Porch 618, the recorder from Calvin's crate. Henry's mic got chairs, ice, and a voice I will always love. He spoke to Calvin with that patient professor tone he used on vines that insisted they were anarchists. You've taken 3 times what you promised. I want to help. But help stops when the lie starts. Calvin's voice, younger than his driver's license. It's all the same pot, Dad. You'll leave it to me, Henry. I'll leave you the ability to be a person. Silence. Then Paige, a cameo I hadn't ordered, breezed in with a clink of glass and an idea. If she keeps resisting, there's a guardianship angle. Judges love safety. We get a letter that she's not safe at home, move her to a condo, list this place, and everyone wins. She laughed like paper cuts. Henry, no one wins with lie-flavored safety. Then the sound of a chair sliding. The recorder clicking off. We let the quiet sit with us, elbows on the table like relatives who'd behaved. Reyes exhaled. That's not a movie villain. That's casual exploitation. Priya tapped the table once. We'll file a litigation hold to Page and Stonebridge today, preserve texts, emails, drafts, and a letter to Calvin's bank requesting statements under your joint right to information if any accounts used your address or Henry's for mail. I nodded until my neck suggested a union break. 3 jokes, taped to my ribs so breath would keep its shift. If manila folders were people, they'd be the neighbors who always bring a flashlight when the power flickers. If locksmiths wrote romance, every chapter would end with it clicked. If Redwells wore capes, they'd be stain-resistant and judge you for using glitter pens. Hector packed his tools, patted the safe like a dog who'd finally learned stay, and left us with a bill and a dignity discount, his phrase, not mine. Reyes collected duplicates, reminded us that guardianship without facts is theater with paperwork, and promised to swing by tomorrow. Priya stayed to draft a cease and desist to Stonebridge and Page. No more porch visits. No on-site signings. Communications through counsel. A litigation hold, this is your polite subpoena-shaped cloud. And a template affidavit for me to sign if anyone tries the not safe at home trick. It says the stove works, the locks lock, the neighbors knock, and you have a wheelbarrow, she said. Judges respect nouns. My second intellectual aging event of the day appeared in the form of a tiny packet. I stared at, like it owed me rent. "What do you call these little do-not-eat things?" I asked, fishing one out of a box of envelopes. My brain doodled anti-moist, no, dry beans delicious. Irrelevant, then, triumphantly, silica gel. I tossed 2 in the red welt because paper likes a desert. At 5. A new email from Paige arrived with the subject line, "Next steps, concern for mom." Inside, "We're worried about your safety in that house, fire hazards. Tools, strangers. Stonebridge can arrange temporary housing while we tidy the sale. I'll bring a notary at 6 p.m. so we can sign authorizations." Quick mercy. I read it once and felt every bee in me vote no. I forwarded it to Priya and Reyes and replied with 6 words that taste like fences. "Please route through council. No entry." Priya answered in under a minute with a draft letter so crisp it made my lamps sit up straight. "Any further direct contact will be documented and presented as part of an intimidation pattern. All communications to council, appointments only." We ended the day with small, faithful chores. I labeled the garden's surviving tools with blue painter's tape, like name tags at a reunion. I made a do-first list for morning water, sift, scan, call Asha about credit freezes, print affidavit, buy mulch that smells like agreements. Mrs. Peña returned with cuttings and the gossip that keeps neighborhoods oxygenated. "If Paige comes back," she said, "I will practice my theater voice." I kissed her cheek with a gratitude that tastes like cumin. The hatch is resealed, the safe rekeyed, the red weld heavy with nouns. Calvin texted at dusk. I listened to the recording. "I'm sorry." I typed, "Thank you. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Gloves." He replied, "Yes, Mom." Not an apology that fixes anything, an appointment that might. Elder wisdom of the day: repair rarely arrives as fireworks. It arrives as a person on time with a shovel. I set 3 cards under the tomato timer, option A or B, but spine, always spine. Guardianship is for safety, not speed. We value what we own decency. Then I turned off the lamps, left the fan on low, and let the house keep watch. Somewhere, a locksmith told a door it had done good work. Somewhere, a judge poured tea without needing a gavel. Somewhere, a bee forgave a human for thinking a garden is a lot. We'll keep proving our nouns tomorrow. I slept with the hatch's new numbers in my head, like a lullaby that doesn't need words. At breakfast, I wrote 2 headers on an index card, option A, prosecute, and option B, conditions. Then a line underneath both one spine equals paper. The kettle clicked, yes. Iris, the beagle, from a different life, would have approved the routine. In her absence, the rosemary nodded. Priya called at 8:15, with sentences that behaved. We can go criminal, elder financial exploitation. Fraud if the evidence says so. Or we can build a civil path, a promissory note, a restitution schedule, a no-contact order with Paige and Stonebridge, and a standing rule that all real estate talk goes through council. She paused. Either way, your spine is paper, not speeches. Detective Reyes texted next, I'll support either. If you choose conditions, we'll still keep an open file and a preservation letter on everyone's inbox. If behavior backslides, we pivot. Translation, we can pick restorative without throwing away retributive. We can keep rails for both trains. Academic phrase of the day. Restorative justice. The public debate that asks whether accountability can be built like a bridge instead of a wall. Critics say it lets harm skate. Advocates say it keeps harm from metastasizing into more harm. Today I wanted a bridge with a toll booth and good receipts. Calvin arrived at 9 with gloves and the face you wear when your mirror finally tells the truth. He reached for the pitchfork, and I heard Henry clear his throat from the better part of silence. "Water first," I said, handing him the hose. "Ash makes lye when it meets rain. It can burn your hands and your plans. Odd fact of the morning, drip wood ash through water long enough, and you get potash lye great for old-time soap, terrible for tomato roots and skin." We sifted in companionable penance, the kind that says we are not performance artists. Mrs. Peña supplied empanadas and discipline, no phones, no shortcuts. Don't argue with the sieve, it has tenure. When we filled 3 contractor bags, I pointed to the porch and the 2 folders I'd laid out like choices in a quiet shop. "Sit," I said. "Listen." I read option A with nouns only. We file a police report. Reyes and the DA decide. You may be charged. Courts and calendars. Probation or worse. Page becomes a subpoena. Not a problem. I let the words land. Then read option B. You sign a promissory note for the total. Henry circled plus interest. You fund an immediate down payment from whatever sellable toy you love least. You sign a no contact stipulation, no Page, no Stonebridge, no porch deals, but you send Priya your banking read-only access and keep a job. You show up here, Saturdays at 9, for garden work sweat, not speeches. Any step broken? We go back to option A without new negotiation. His eyes did the arithmetic men do when pride has overdrawn its account. How much is the total? Enough to be real, I said. Not enough to ruin your life unless you insist on helping. He nodded once, like a man accepting gravity. Option B. Good, I said. Now we make it boring. My first intellectual aging event of the day arrived courtesy of stationery. I turned to Priya's draft and said, "We'll need the paper that says the signature happened in front of a stamp person." My brain paraded stamp witness, licensed witness, and finally delivered notary acknowledgement with the weary dignity of a late train. I wrote ac aus presence proof. Jurat, ex oath in the downline because vocabulary likes to be escorted home. Dignity intact, verbs steady. Priya joined by video, hair up, glasses on, voice at the volume where truth sounds like a lullaby. Calvin. Here's a plain English promissory note principle. Interest. Monthly payment. First installment due in 10 days. Collateral if you default. Here's a no-contact stipulation with Page and Stonebridge. Here's a read-only authorization so we can see your accounts without touching your money. And here are garden terms Saturdays at 9. No phones on the beds. Mrs. Peña has veto power over your attitude. Mrs. Peña raised an eyebrow that could command a navy. I accept, she said. Asha pinged in with her tidy calm. I can set a track-only view in a secure portal for Calvin's restitution fund and a separate sub-account titled Garden Repairs and Soil. Also, I recommend a credit freeze for you, Mara, and an alert on property records so if anyone tries to file a deed or a memo, the county emails us. Calvin read the pages with lips moving like a student who finally brought a pencil. He signed where Priya pointed, date in blue, initials quiet as apology. We scheduled a notary for tomorrow at the clinic, not the porch, because procedure needs neutral tables more than oak grain. Priya emailed litigation holds to Stonebridge and Page while we watched the little progress bars report to duty. A minute later, Stonebridge's counsel replied, "We acknowledge receipt. We will preserve comms. No entry or offers pending counsel." Paige replied with something that tried to be concerned and landed near performative. "We just want Mom safe." Priya responded with one sentence that made my house sit up straighter. "Safety is being measured by stove, locks, neighbors, and the wheelbarrow, not by speed." 3 jokes for the ribcage, so lungs kept their shift. If litigation holds were vitamins, today I took the chewy kind with lemon. If promissory notes were appliances, mine would be a slow cooker steady heat, no drama. If no contact stipulations had a ringtone, it would be silence. Blessed and legally enforceable. We broke for lunch sandwiches, water, an apple that remembered when apples were a dessert. Calvin cleared plates without being asked, which is either contrition or muscle memory. I wasn't taking votes. While we rinsed, he said, "Paige told me guardianship would be merciful." He stared at his hands. "Mercy that moves your mother out of her house so you can flip it isn't mercy," I said. "It's marketing." Priya sent a second document called Garden Covenant Henry's Draft, cleaned up and made real pollinator beds protected. At least 40% of the lot dedicated to permeable ground. Open herb fence for neighbors. No selling air or credits without the garden's consent, her phrase. I wanted to embroider it. Calvin signed his name under a sentence that began, "I will not torch," and ended again. The again was mine. He didn't argue. Detective Reyes stopped by with her body cam in a pocket and professionalism in a sensible jacket. She took a duplicate of the safe docs, scanned the signature pages, and left us 2 incident numbers, one for the fire non-injury, reported, one for possible financial exploitation, open, pending. "I'm not your adversary unless you ask me to be," she said to Calvin. "If you keep your promises, I'm just a file that goes quiet." He swallowed and nodded. "What about Paige?" "Paige is a person who will meet paper she doesn't like," Reyes said. "If she steps over your mother's boundary, I'll introduce her to the judge who likes nouns." We went back to the beds because victory that doesn't touch dirt is just theory. Calvin raked, I sifted. Mrs. Peña adjudicated where the compost should start over. The bees forgave us incrementally, which is the only speed forgiveness keeps. In the late afternoon, I found one of Henry's labels that made me laugh out loud, basil for neighbors who can keep secrets. I tucked it into my pocket like a passport. By 5. The ash was tamed to a manageable memory, and the hatch wore its blue bracelets again. I printed a restitution ledger date, amount, source, initials, so Calvin's debts couldn't shapeshift into myths. We set the first entry for 10 days out, a meaningful number that didn't require a miracle. He stared at the box and said, "I'll sell the motorcycle." I nodded. "The garden thanks you in advance." My second intellectual aging event pounced when I tried to remember the name of the spigot by the shed. "Hand me the wall faucet," I said. My mouth tried hose mouth and water beak. Before my brain returned hose bib, like a kid who finally comes in for dinner. I wrote hose bib bird in the margin and toasted my survival with a long drink. At dusk, an email from Stonebridge's lawyer arrived. "We are withdrawing our purchase proposal and instructing our agents to cease contact. We will cooperate with any preservation requests." I forwarded it to Priya, Reyes, and the folder named Paige does not enter because my labels have feelings. We closed the day with a short ceremony. Henry would have liked one slow lap of the garden, our hands empty, our pockets full of labels and receipts. Option B. Then, Calvin said softly, "Option B." I said, "And you'll forgive me if I keep a clean option A in a drawer?" He nodded. "Keep it." 3 last jokes. So sleep can find me without a map. If option A were a kitchen tool, it'd be the cast iron skillet heavy. Honest, works when needed. If option B were a plant, it'd be time slow to fill in. Unstoppable once it does. If Paige's concern had calories, we'd all still be hungry. I taped tomorrow's list under the tomato timer, notary at 10 clinic. Credit freeze at 11. Asha's link. Mulch at 2 smells like agreements. Water at dusk sounds like apology. The fan stitched the room into something gentle. The hatch whispered its numbers in the back of my mind. Somewhere. In the neighborhood version of a choir loft. The bees practiced a hymn that forgives mortals slowly. Paper waited on the table. Patient as a chair, we were not finished. We had begun. At 9:42, I tucked the promissory note, the no-contact stipulation, and Henry's cleaned-up garden covenant into a red welt and walked to the legal clinic 2 blocks off Main. Neutral air, neutral chairs, a clock that believed in Wednesdays. Calvin arrived on time, which is a new verb for him. Priya met us with a notary whose stamp did not wear a cape, just a sensible smile and a tray of blue pens. We signed the note, principal, interest, first installment in 10 days, then the no-contact page, Stonebridge, and any agent or affiliate who thinks porches are conference rooms. Then the covenant that promises 40% soil, neighbors at the herb fence, and no selling credits or air without the garden's consent. The notary took our IDs like a librarian taking returns and pressed her seal with the quiet confidence of a well-tuned kettle. My intellectual aging event arrived as Priya slid over one last page for recording. Attach the legal description, she said. My mouth offered the house words first, then the map paragraph, then finally, with a sigh that forgave me, legal description. I wrote the house words X, legal description, in the down line of my pad, so future me would have a chaperone. Dignity intact, nouns supervised. Odd fact of the morning, notarizations come in 2 main flavors. Acknowledgements, you declare you signed, and jurats, you swear the contents are true. The stamp looks similar, the verbs are not. We used acknowledgements today, no oaths, just responsibility. By 11:05, Asha had me on the phone for the credit freeze trifecta, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. She explained the difference between a fraud alert banks should call and a freeze they can't open anything without my unfreeze pin, even if they bring compliments. We set county property record alerts to any deed, memo, or imaginative nonsense filed against my parcel pings me and Priya. Paper behaves better when it knows it's being watched, Asha said. I imagined Exhibit C blushing. It helped. We stopped by the county recorder to file the garden covenant as a declaration tied to the lot. Priya paperclipped the legal description book and page from the original survey, the notary acknowledgements, and a 1-page intent. This garden is a commons with rules. It's not a fortress, she said. It's a fence that invites. The clerk stamped with a sound like a polite bird landing. Academic phrase of the day, moral licensing. The public debate that says after we do something good, we permit ourselves a small bad. Calvin used, I'm helping mom be safe to license a burn and a rush sale. I've done it too. I made soup for Mrs. Peña. Surely I can ignore the bank alerts. The counter-argument is that integrity doesn't run tabs. Today's plan, no tabs. We got lunch at a small place that put still on its tuna like a dare. Calvin kept his phone in his pocket without being asked. What happens if I miss a payment, he said. Option A, I answered. He nodded into his sandwich. Not fear. Comprehension. I paid the bill because today was about receipts, not theater. Back home, the garden waited with a patience I want to deserve. At 2:03, the mulch truck arrived unscented. Natural wood. Not the dyed carnival bark that stains rain like regret. We wheelbarrowed, yes. I remembered the word 3 yards into neat islands around survivors and the empty shapes we will replant. Mulch is just cooperation between gravity and time, 2 to 3 inches to block light. Hold moisture. And keep the soil from evaporating its patience. We tucked it around the lilac like a shawl. 3 jokes to keep the lungs on their union shift. If notary stamps had theme songs, mine would be a whisper with percussion. If credit freezes were desserts, they'd be plain gelatin unexciting, absolutely what you need. If mulch had a philosophy degree, its thesis would be shade beats weeds. At 3:11, an unknown number called with a script. Miss Whitfield. This is Adult Protective Services responding to a report that you may be unsafe at home. Moral licensing. Exhibit Z. I breathed. Then invited the caseworker at 4 p.m., appointments only, and texted Priya and Detective Reyes. We'll be present. Priya replied. Reyes added. APS appreciates legible kitchens. We spent the hour making legibility easy, stove clean and working. Smoke detectors chirp tested. First aid kit stocked. Locks that lock. Neighbor list on the fridge. And the affidavit of safety Priya drafted yesterday's stove. Locks, neighbors. Wheelbarrow signed and clipped to the red weld. Mrs. Peña brought a lemon loaf and the kind of commentary that improves any hearing. When APS arrived, we gave a tour without monologues. Who helps you, they asked. People with keys to their own doors, I said, handing over the neighbor list. How do you shop? I push a cart and say no to magazines. Any exploitation concerns. I looked at Calvin. Addressed by paper. Incident numbers here. The caseworker nodded, made notes, and said the line that returns oxygen to a house. We have no immediate concerns. Reyes shook her hand like colleagues. Priya sent them copies of the covenant and the no-contact stipulation for their file. Practicality is contagious. At 5:06, Paige texted through a new number as if a fresh SIM could launder intent. I heard APS visited. You see, it's unsafe. I forwarded it to counsel, then sent my 4 words. Please route through counsel. Blocked the number. Labeled the screenshot. Paige knew now blocked because labels are how I refuse to narrate feelings as evidence. We watered in the long shade. Calvin asked if the covenant means no selling air ever. It means the sky belongs to the bees first, I said. He smiled. Which is different from agreeing. It's the face you make when a new sentence tries your tongue. My second intellectual aging event, skulking in the shed, I reached for the long, flat tamping, the ground, squasher. My brain kindly coughed up hand tamper before I invented soil squisher in permanent ink. I wrote hand tamper equals ground squasher unpublished on an index card and taped it inside the cabinet so my future comedy stays private. Priya emailed the recorder's instrument number for the covenant. I jotted it on the downline the way some people collect seashells. Asha followed with 2-factor confirmations and the property record alert registration. Reyes sent a photo of the chain of custody stickers on our duplicate files. Barcodes aligned like tiny soldiers. Boredom, properly organized, is a lullaby. Sunset found us with 3 tidy mulch moons and a stack of labels Henry would have teased basil for neighbors who keep secrets. Tomatoes jury still out. Cucumbers armored. Calvin read the promissory note again and asked, "Can I add more than the minimum?" "Consent is sexy," I said. Then added, "Yes." We closed the hatch new combination by heart and wrote, "Sealed 627" in blue tape. I put the red welt back on its shelf and stuck a silly prize ribbon on it that read, Exhibit C, Appreciation Society, because joy is a tool. Then I brewed tea and sat on the steps with the beehive's low hymn in my bones. Calvin joined me without speech, which is sometimes the bravest kind. 3 last jokes, so sleep doesn't get lost on the way here. If APS carried a brand, it would be Legibility TM. Now with fewer surprises. If Exhibit C had a dating profile, it'd say, "Don't leave me blank." If wheelbarrows formed a union, their motto would be, "We move what you meant." Before I turned out the lights, I wrote 3 cards for the tomato timer stack. Integrity doesn't run tabs. Safety is measured, not marketed. Mulch your nouns, shade the weeds. The fan stitched the room into something gentle. The hatch's new numbers hummed without needing to be spoken. Somewhere a clerk filed our covenant under book and page. Somewhere an alert system stretched and waited for mischief. Somewhere a realtor priced a different lot and called it clean slate. Not knowing the best stories start with ash and a ledger. Morning arrived with a small, durable plan coffee, deposit, mulch, and no theatrics. I set the red welt by the door, tucked the promissory note behind the front flap so it could feel important, and wrote a single line on the pad's downline, "Receipts aren't rude." Calvin texted at 8:03, "Got a buyer for the bike? Cashier's check at 9. I replied, "Meet me at the bank. Bring title." He sent a thumbs up that looked like it had taken a shower. At Pine and Wren, Asha greeted us with the kind of calm that makes even pens behave. Calvin handed over a cashier's check and a greasy envelope of motorcycle papers. "Title signed on the back," I asked. He flipped the cardboard like it might bite and nodded. Asha opened a sub-account labeled Restitution Calvin and another titled Garden Repairs and Soil. "First deposit," she said. "Split it 70% restitution. 30% soil." It felt like math that understood weather. She printed 2 receipts. Blue inked signatures, the kind that make anxiety stop pacing. "And remember," she added, looking at Calvin without scolding, "cashier's checks are not magic. They can be forged. We verified this one with issuing bank. Paper before celebration." I wanted to embroider the sentence on a tea towel. Odd fact of the morning, mulch piles can self-heat and smolder if higher than 6 feet the microbial party gets rowdy. Keep them lower, turn often, and don't park them against wood fences unless you like meeting your fire department socially. Gardeners are fun at parties, just specific. My intellectual aging event arrived in the irrigation aisle at Murphy's Hardware. "We need the long and swishy sprinkler," I told the teenager in a vest. My brain proudly offered spray wiggler and shaky hose bar before sending oscillating sprinkler to the front with its hair combed. "That one," I said. And the vest kid did not even smirk. Dignity intact, vocabulary supervised. We added hose washers, a Y splitter, and because optimism has hose threads, a new nozzle that promised gentle rain and would probably attempt power wash unless watched. Back home, A white sedan idled by the curb the way vans do in shows where the soundtrack wants you nervous. A woman stepped out with a clipboard and an expression that believed in clipboards. "City code," she said. "Anonymous complaint, unsafe yard. Fire debris. Hazardous storage." I could feel Paige's perfume in the subtext. "Welcome," I said, opening the gate. "We've prepared for your nouns." We walked the perimeter. I pointed to sealed 627 on the hatch, the smoke detectors that chirp when asked, the first aid kit, the hose bib, and tamper-resistant outlet. The affidavit Priya drafted stoveworks, locks lock, neighbors knock, wheelbarrow wheels, misses. Peña produced lemon loaf and proof of life. Detective Reyes arrived mid-tour with a nod that said, "We pass," or "The form is wrong." The inspector checked boxes, took photos of mulch islands respectful enough to write you a recommendation, and said the sentence that returns air to a porch, "No violations observed." She handed me a copy of the report and climbed back into her sedan. The clipboard satisfied. We waved like people who prefer jazz to cymbals. Academic phrase of the day: principal-agent problem. The public debate where the person who is supposed to act for you, agent, is tempted to act for themselves. Commission, speed, bragging rights. And the person in charge, principal, can't see every move. Paige was Calvin's agent, like foxes are coop consultants. The standard cure is alignment contracts, oversight, and, when that fails, a gate that says appointments only, counsel present. By noon. Priya pinged from court, heads up Paige filed an ex parte guardianship petition, claims you're unsafe, asks for temporary control of residence. I'm filing an opposition and a request for sanctions. No hearing granted. Clerk routed it to next week. I'll forward copies. I breathed in, then out, then wrote 3 sentences that keep me from narrating fear as prophecy. We are safe. We have receipts. We have neighbors. Then I texted Priya. Thank you for choosing nouns. She sent back a small scales of justice emoji that looked like it had a day job. We ate tuna salad with dill like rebels with a lunchbox. Calvin cleared plates and asked, not melodramatically, "What if the judge believes her judges like chairs that don't tip?" I said. "They prefer stove, locks, neighbor list, APS notes, covenant recorded, receipts for mulch." He nodded. A man rehearsing a new kind of courage boring. The afternoon belonged to shovels. We spread the rest of the mulch, set the oscillating sprinkler to its most polite setting, and returned compost to the beds like apology in particulate form. I found Henry's old string line in the shed and remembered how he'd pluck it like a base to make straight rows feel inevitable. We staked tomorrow's planned peas, chard, basil for neighbors who can keep secrets, and a ceremonial patch of zinnias because color is not optional. 3 jokes taped to my ribs so lungs made their shift. If code inspectors had a cologne, it would be citrus and clipboard. If oscillating sprinklers wrote memoirs, Chapter 1 would be I swiveled, therefore I was. If anonymous complaints had return addresses, they'd be less enthusiastic. At 3, Asha phoned with an update that sounded like symphony woodwinds. County property alert pinged, someone tried to file a memorandum of intent against your parcel this morning. Recorder bounced it for missing signatures. We've noted it. I imagined Paige sucking on a lemon labeled instrument number required and felt both petty and restored. The bank emailed check images from Henry's Calvin loans. We sat at the table and did the arithmetic out loud because shame does worse work in silence. Calvin wrote the total next to principal, then calculated interest at the modest rate Priya set. "I can meet this," he said, voice steady. "And if I can't 1 month, I'll call before I can't. That sentence alone is expensive," I said. "Pay it with your calendar." We took a break to visit Henry's room under Roots with Reyes on speaker, just to reconfirm we hadn't missed anything with fresh eyes. My second intellectual aging event ambushed me at the shelf when I reached for a box and said, "Hand me the plastic drawer with an attitude." My brain generously produced tote and then, a beat later, latch when I called the clasp a snappy mouth. I wrote latch, not snappy mouth in the margin of a shop-worn index card and forgave myself. Reyes, hearing me, laughed softly. "Vocabulary is a contact sport," she said. "You're winning." Inside the safe, we found one more manila envelope Henry had tucked behind the ledger's Garden Day neighbors. A list of names and phone numbers, notes about who likes thyme and who sneezes near chamomile, and a penciled budget for a Saturday replanting party mulch, seedlings, lemonade, 3 extra rakes for the people who will swear they brought their own and did not. There was even a sketched flyer with Henry's hand-lettered title, "Roots Remember." I pressed the paper to the oak work table like a blessing. "So we made it real, Mrs. Peña," texted the block thread. I printed flyers on yellow paper that smells like middle school and taped them to lampposts with blue painter's tape that deserves a statue. Saturday, 9 to 1. Bring gloves. We have water and labels. Leave drama at the gate. Priya volunteered a folding table. Asha sent a donation for seedlings with a note for neighbors who keep secrets. Reyes promised to wander by in plain clothes and buy lemonade at sticker price. At 5:40, a calendar alert slid across my screen, restitution installment 1, due 10 days. I didn't add a loud ringtone. I added a silent one that looks like a green dot because dignity is quieter than panic. Calvin copied the event to his phone and set 2 reminders. "No snooze," he said. Like a person who has met a new religion. Dusk arrived like a hush with opinions. We walked one slow lap around beds that were no longer crime scenes. Just soil asking for seed. The bees wrote their complaint in the air accepted. The oscillating sprinkler clicked toward the other end of its sentence. I tucked Henry's Roots Remember flyer under a magnet shaped like an eggplant and put the receipts in the red weld where they could marry other nouns. 3 last jokes so sleep can find me without asking the neighbors for directions. If Redwells ran festivals, they'd call it Staplepalooza and end on time. If cashier's checks were dogs, they'd all wear tags that say, "Call my bank, not my owner." If mulch had manners, it would send a thank you note to rain. Before lights out, I wrote 3 more cards for the tomato timer stack. Receipts aren't rude. They're love letters to future you. Agents need chaperones. Gates need hinges. Neighbors are the legal doctrine that outlives paperwork. I left the fan on low to sew the room into something gentle and whispered to the hatch numbers without saying them. Somewhere downtown, a clerk stamped "no hearing granted" on a petition with more adjectives than evidence. Somewhere. Asha's alerts dozed with one eye open. Somewhere. A yellow flyer fluttered like a promise you can plant. Saturday started the way good repairs do, quiet, with a list taped to the door and coffee that minded its business. Yellow flyers flapped on the lampposts like shy flags. Roots remember. 9-1, bring gloves. We have water and labels. Leave drama at the gate. I set out the folding table Priya loaned. The seedling flats Asha's donation bought. And a jar labeled Lemonade Fund because even generosity needs envelopes. Calvin arrived 5 minutes early, which is a sentence I have never said before. He carried the oscillating sprinkler like a peace offering and asked, rows or islands. Rows to start, islands later, I said. We'll choreograph as we learn the crowd. Odd fact of the day, bees see ultraviolet patterns on petals, honey guides that we can't without fancy cameras. To them, a zinnia is a runway with lights. To us, it's a cheerful wheel. Reality is generous that way. It lets two truths bloom in one place if you don't shout. By 9:06, neighbors came like a tide that knew the steps, Mrs. Peña with empanadas and gossip as glue. The Ramos twins with a wheelbarrow they named Thunder. Mr. Cho carrying a tape measure and a sense of occasion. And Detective Reyes in sunglasses that said off-duty, still noticing. Priya arrived with clipboards, a backup notary. We did not need her. But the stamp looked grateful to be invited. And a roll of blue painter's tape I wanted to put in a frame. Someone brought a speaker and set the volume to friendly radio in the next room, ASMR for shovels. My intellectual aging event showed up at the tarp pile, smug as a cat. Hand me the big, coated rectangle blanket, I said, miming something between a picnic and a circus. My brain offered rain sheet, then harbor, Polin, before remembering tarpaulin like a prodigal syllable. I laughed at myself. Wrote tarp in tarpaulin on an index card and taped it to the inside of the shed door so future me and the shed can conspire. We divided labor by verbs. Calvin and the twins raked and hauled. I laid lines with Mr. Cho's tape, plucking the string like Henry used to until straight felt inevitable. Mrs. Peña ran the hospitality union. Priya kept a sign-in sheet not to be officious. But because community is easier to rebuild if you know who to call when you find extra basil, we set the oscillating sprinkler to whisper and tucked mulch around roots like conversation at 2 a.m. soft, specific, no speeches. Academic phrase of the day, tragedy of the commons. The public debate that says shared spaces get overused because no one owns the consequences. The critique is old. The counterpoint is newer and better dressed Elinor Ostrom's work on governing the commons neighbors who write rules, keep logs, and bring cookies often do fine. Today the counterpoint wore gardening gloves and a name tag that said, "Hi, I'm here to stake peace." At 10:20, the first small crisis tried a solo. A white SUV idled at the curb and a phone emerged like a periscope. Paige, maybe a cousin of Paige. The genus was Clipordiata performativa. Reyes drifted toward the sidewalk like shade with a badge in her back pocket. "You're welcome to help," she said, voice set to porch. "We're busy with nouns." The phone retreated. The SUV considered its options, then remembered it had somewhere else to audition. We applauded with our eyebrows and kept planting. 3 jokes taped to my ribs so lungs remembered their union contract. If Blue Painter's tape had a wedding registry, I'd buy it a label maker and a folding table. If tarpaulins had horoscopes, today's would read, "Avoid sharp corners. You will be appreciated and wrinkled." If oscillating sprinklers wrote poetry, they'd rhyme left with left again and feel very proud. We made a commons corner by the fence time, mint in a bottomless pot so it can't colonize foreign countries. Chives that forgive beginners. A kid named Jaya drew a chalk map, take somes, leave stories. I almost cried at a sidewalk, which is how you know the day was working. Calvin staked peas with twine and care, asking the air quietly. "Is this tight enough?" "Tighter," I said, "but not punitive." He smiled, a verb I have not seen him conjugate with twine before. Asha walked over with iced tea and pinned a small laminated card to the table, "Property alert email active. Fraud alerts on. Credit freezes filed. It read like a scoreboard where bureaucracy wins politely. She high-fived Mrs. Peña, who announced to no one in particular, "We are now a neighborhood with paperwork," and passed the empanadas left. This is how empires are founded and gardens replanted, one snack and one spreadsheet at a time. By 11, Zinnia starts went in, like confetti with roots. The Ramos twins debated marigolds as nematode banishers or old wives' tales. Mr. Cho quoted an extension service and declared them inconclusive, but photogenic. We installed them anyway, where they could at least scare mosquitoes with good posture. Reyes wandered the beds and, in a voice only I could hear, asked, "Want me at the ex parte hearing next week, please?" I said. "Bench likes chairs that don't tip and witnesses who don't audition." She nodded and bought lemonade with exact change like literature. Calvin's penance hour arrived on schedule. I handed him the restitution ledger and the sub-account printout. "Every deposit log's here," I said. "Source, amount, initial, date. Receipts aren't rude, they're love letters to future you." He wrote motorcycle sale deposit 1 and his initials like a person trying on adult sizes. Mrs. Peña peered over his shoulder with the benevolence of 1,000 grandmothers. "If you keep this up," she said, "I will let you borrow my tongs at the barbecue. Do not make me regret it." At noon, we paused for a halftime show lemonade, empanadas. A short reading from Henry's flyer, Roots Remember, and a joke about Exhibit C Appreciation Society that sent the lawyerly subset into giggles. I spoke for 90 seconds because speeches are weeds, thank you. "We'll keep the Commons corner stocked. Please water at dusk. Leave drama at the gate. Take tomatoes when they say their names." The speaker played a song that belonged in kitchens and we went back to verbs. My second intellectual aging event pounced near the trellis. "Pass me the U-shaped nail things," I said, wiggling 2 fingers like a crab. My mouth tried ground staples and metal hairpins, then landed, mercifully, on landscape staples. I wrote it on a stick with a Sharpie and jammed it into the soil so I could pretend I meant to label hardware all along. Dignity restored by signage, the gardener's oldest trick. At 12:37, Priya took a call and returned with eyebrows that had opinions. Page's ex parte petition got a note on the docket. No emergency relief granted. Hearing set Wednesday. Both sides present. Judge prefers nouns. We'll bring APS's no concerns, the covenant's instrument number, code inspection report, and your affidavit about stoves, locks, neighbors, and the wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow is an underrated expert witness, I said. Reyes snorted iced tea. We finished with a planting ritual. Henry loved 3 fingers pressed into the soil on either side of a start. Then a count of 10 for courage. The twins insisted you had to hum for the roots to recognize you. They hummed the chorus from a summer song, and everyone pretended the science was settled. By 1, we had peace that made a line like a sentence that knows where it's going. Basil for neighbors who can keep secrets. Marigolds holding court. Zinnia's already auditioning for birthday jars. And a commons corner that looked like a policy paper written by cookies. The hatch wore its blue tape sealed 627, and the safe numbers lived in my head like a lullaby that doesn't need to be sung. We took a group photo with the speaker turned off so the clique could find us. Then passed the lemonade jar. It came back heavier. Empires. Cleanup had its own joy-stacking tools. Rolling hoses without reenacting snakes. Sweeping the porch into a pile that looked like punctuation. Calvin stayed to the end without checking his phone, which I intend to list in my heart's ledger under character interest accruing. 3 last jokes, then rest. If neighbors were a legal doctrine, they'd be strict community review. If zinnias had a union, their demand would be more jars, fewer metaphors. If garden gloves wrote haiku, the last line would be, "Wash me, I beg you." I sat on the steps after everyone left, let the oscillating sprinkler whisper, and updated the tomato timer stack. Hearing Wednesday bring nouns, leave outrage at home. Water at dusk, apology with a hose. Invite the kid who drew the chalk map to label tomatoes. The sky did its late afternoon act, no symbols. Just light that knows its lane. Inside, the Redweld rested where paper sleeps after a humane day. Outside, the Commons Corner waited to test trust. Elder wisdom of the day. The opposite of the tragedy of the Commons is not ownership. It's a sign-up sheet, a lemon loaf, and a rule about phones on the beds. We wrote the rules in pencil, which is how grown-ups say we'll keep learning. Calvin walked back from the curb, counting something only he could see. "Same time tomorrow," he asked. "Dusk," I said. "The roots remember who shows up." He nodded and left like a person who intends to keep an appointment. The sprinkler clicked to the other end of its sentence. The bees practiced syllables above the zinnia's UV runways. The gate sign fluttered once, appointments only. Council present, and settled. I breathed and did not explain it to myself. The garden understood. Monday smelled like wet mulch and clean paper. I set the Redweld on the table, slid the APS no concerns note under the clip with the code inspector's report, and wrote a single line on my pad's downline bench-like nouns, not theater. Calvin arrived at 8 with coffee that didn't make promises and a printout of his restitution ledger motorcycle sale deposit 1 circled like a compass finally learning north. We reviewed the packet with Priya on video covenant instrument number. Property alert emails, notarized promissory note, no contact stipulation, neighbor list, photos of sealed 627 and 3 pictures of the oscillating sprinklers set to polite. Judges have lawns, Priya said, even if only in their heads. Odd fact of the morning, most judges don't actually use gavels. Many courtrooms don't even have one. Order happens because calendars and clerks agree. Not because wood meets wood. The myth is louder than the procedure. The procedure wins anyway. We rehearsed answers without adjectives. How are you eating? I cook on a working stove. Who helps you? Named neighbors. Here is the list. Why did APS visit an anonymous report? They found no concerns. Calvin asked if he should apologize in court. You should behave in court, Priya said. Apologies live in schedules and ledgers. My intellectual aging event arrived while taping a tap onto the last exhibit. Where's the little reading stand thing, I asked, picturing the wooden slope in front of the judge. My brain offered podium close, then music stand no, then finally lectern like a patient teacher who's graded my homework since 1979. I wrote lectern podium in the margin and bribed my dignity with a lemon candy. Tuesday, we kept the garden honest water at dusk. Labels facing the path like name tags at a reunion, and let Asha sharpen the paperwork. She added a printout of the property record alert bounce when someone tried to file a memorandum of intent without signatures. Looks good in a judge's stack, she said. Detective Reyes texted. I'll be in the gallery. No sunglasses. Bench likes eyes. Calvin signed 2 more garden chores into the covenant log without sighing twine retentioned. Commons corner watered. The sign "Leave drama at the gate" retaped after noon sun tested glue loyalty. Academic phrase of the day: paternalism versus autonomy. The public argument where safety puts its hands on freedom and promises it's for your own good. The debate isn't simple. Sometimes seatbelts save lives. Sometimes for your own good is just an efficient way to move an old woman out of her house. My vote this week: autonomy with rails and receipts. Wednesday morning. The courthouse wore its quiet like a uniform. The 10 calendar moved on time. The clerk's stamps sang soprano. Paige arrived in a blazer emotionally related to a clipboard. Her lawyer spoke first, as lawyers do. Emergency guardianship due to unsafe conditions, yard fire, concealed storage, hazardous tools. Priya stood at the lectern with a stack that knew its choreography. Opposition with exhibits, she said, and began to hand nouns across APS no concerns. Code inspection, no violations. Covenant instrument number, affidavit with stove, locks. Neighbors, wheelbarrow. And the no contact stipulation Paige had already violated twice in print. The judge looked exactly like good chairs feel. Counsel. Why ex parte? She asked Paige's side. Voice said to library. We feared immediate harm, the lawyer said, pointing in the direction of my compost. Priya slid a photo of roots, remember zinnias, peas online. The Commons corner chalked, take some, leave stories onto the rail. Emergency has been replaced by neighbors, she said. And by law? The judge asked me to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm? The clerk began. Affirm, I said, because faith is gravity and I don't borrow it for oaths. I kept my answers clipped and kind. Stove works. Locks lock. Beehives hum. Unionized. And the concealed storage. A root cellar. Your Honor. I said. Inventory logged with police. Tamper evidence seals on duplicates. Safe rekeyed. Blue tape with sealed and timestamp. The judge's mouth did a thing I think might be private laughter's cousin. Blue tape, she said softly, as if she, too, knows what keeps a day together. 3 jokes, kept behind my ribs so breath remembered to show up. If clerks had a band, they'd be the Stamps, and they'd always hit the downbeat. If lecterns had a Twitter, they'd subtweet podiums all day. If Blue Tape ran for office, I'd canvass. Priya called Reyes as a fact witness. Reyes wore her badge like punctuation, not a prop. APS found no immediate concerns. She said, code inspection clean. We have 2 incident numbers, 1 for the fire, Calvin admitted and corrected, 1 open for financial exploitation under review. We have a litigation hold on Paige's communications and Stonebridge's. My office is watching the inbox like a hawk with a calendar. The judge nodded the way people nod when they are being told something with verifiable nouns. Paige's counsel tried paternalism with a nicer haircut. We just want safety, he said. Safety is measured, Priya replied, not marketed. And it rarely arrives with a notary at 6 p.m. The judge lifted a hand and the air sat down. No emergency relief, she said. Guardianship petition is denied without prejudice. Any future petition will present evidence, not adjectives. Each side bears its own fees today. Miss Page, further direct contact occurs at your peril. Route through counsel or not at all. Her gavel did not appear. The order did. We exhaled like honest work had found its lungs. Outside, the sky remembered it was Wednesday. Calvin stood at the top of the steps with the posture of a man interviewing for a better version of himself. Now what, he asked. Now we go buy more mulch, I said. And Priya smiled as if she'd been waiting to hear that all week. Back home, Asha's property alert pinged once more. Stonebridge formally withdrew any and all interest. I filed the email under Page does not enter and moved on with my pulse. We watered at dusk, apologizing to Basil by hose. And I wrote, hearing denied. Bring cookies to Priya on an index card because gratitude deserves carbohydrates. My second intellectual aging event ambushed me at the spigot when I told Calvin, turn the Y-shaped hose splitter. My mouth produced forky faucet, adorable. Wrong. Then my brain supplied Y-splitter like a small hero on a parade float. I wrote forky faucet equal Y-splitter no on the inside of the shed door where my private dictionary now lives. A zine for future me. We ate sandwiches on the steps. Mrs. Peña arrived with a foil pan and the announcement. This is lasagna for verdicts that behave. Reyes stopped by out of uniform, paid too much for lemonade, and put a sticky note on my red-weld receipts are a love language. Calvin updated the restitution ledger with a second micro deposit from selling tools he did not need. He did not tell me. He slid the receipt under the clip and went to retention twine. Growth is loud at first. Then it gets on with its verbs. 3 more jokes. Because sleep likes company. If covenants threw parties, there'd be name tags and a strict no blank exhibits policy. If wheelbarrows had horoscopes, today's would read steady progress, beware loose gravel. If zinnias were lawyers, they'd object to metaphors and demand more jars. Night moved in, courteous. I taped 2 new cards under the tomato timer bench like nouns. Keep speaking them. Autonomy with rails beats speed with marketing. The hatch whispered its numbers from the back of my mind like a lullaby I no longer need to hum. The bees traced UV runways the zinnias had painted for them, unbothered by our laws. I put the gavel that never existed back in the stories drawer and left the fan on low to stitch the room into something gentle. Tomorrow we plant the basil that keeps secrets and stake the tomatoes that want supervision. Paper will wait on the table, patient as a chair. Dawn tasted like hose water and relief. I set the red welt on the porch table, slid the court order guardianship denied under the clip where good nouns sleep, and wrote 1 line on my pad's downline, keep the rails, lose the rush. The garden had that Monday after a parade look, confetti of zinnia petals. A dignified line of peas. The commons corner chalked, take some. Leave stories with a small hand spelling. Calvin arrived early, coffee in one hand, a bag of soil test kits in the other. Science before speeches, he said. And for once the sentence fit his mouth. Odd fact of the morning, good compost runs hot. 160 degrees is the sweet spot where pathogens fall out of love and weed seeds stop having opinions. We stirred the pile. A ribbon thermometer bloomed to 145. Henry would approve. I told the steam. The pile answered with a soft bread smell, the clean kind of rot that means tomorrow has a pantry. Priya texted Page's petition officially closed. Judge added a polite paragraph. Safety is demonstrated by stove, locks, neighbors, and receipts. We will pursue sanctions quietly if her filings get creative. Detective Reyes followed with financial file stays open. No cuffs, just calendars. Keep logging restitution. Asha forwarded a property alert ping. Attempted filing none. Translation. The inbox remembered its manners. My intellectual aging event snuck up at the tool rack when I reached for the long-handled, the slicey hoe, I said, miming a flat triangle shaving the soil. My brain produced ground razor yikes, then weed shovel, before delivering stirrup hoe with the smugness of a cat finding its sunbeam. I wrote stirrup razor on the shed card where my private dictionary lives and gave myself a gold star in pencil. The grown-up version of forgiveness. Academic phrase of the day, path dependence. The public debate that says where you end up depends on the path you took, even when other routes later look shorter. We could have sold fast into Page's performance and Stonebridge's speed. Instead, we stapled rails, covenant, alerts, receipts, and now the path does our steering. The critique is that path dependence excuses stubbornness. The nuance is that some grooves are actually guardrails. We walked the beds in a slow litany: peas, chard, basil for neighbors who keep secrets, marigolds doing photogenic science, zinnias practicing for jars. Calvin read the restitution ledger aloud like Grace Deposit 1 motorcycle. Deposit 2 tools. Deposit 3 freelance weekend hauling pending. He tucked a cashier's receipt under the clip and didn't look at me to be graded. Elder wisdom of the day, repentance measured in ledgers, is stronger than repentance measured in adjectives. At mid-morning, small footsteps sounded on the path and Jaya appeared with chalk-dusted hands. I made tomato labels, she announced, revealing a stack of tongue depressors printed in a child's decisive font: Roma, Cherokee purple, sun gold, and one that read the big guy, because we permit whimsy inside reason. We pressed labels into soil. The sticks looked like little flags announcing immigration to a country that requires watering at dusk. We broke for tea and receipts. Priya stopped by to drop a stamped copy of the recorded Garden Covenant instrument number circled like a moon and a tiny envelope for our Exhibit C Appreciation Society dues, $10 for the lemonade jar. Which is how laws stay human. Reyes came out of uniform and in aviators, bought lemonade with exact change, and stood with me at the edge of the commons corner. You know, she said, most of my job is chasing adrenaline's bad ideas. This, she tipped her chin at Basil and bee traffic. This is the opposite of adrenaline. It's how neighborhoods do time. We set the soil tests to steep like tea bags for dirt. Calvin read the chart. I spotted colors. pH 6.8 vegetable heaven, he said. Phosphorus okay, potassium thank you. Wood ash may be too generous. We made a plant compost here. Gypsum there, water always. He took the stirrup hoe and did a clean ribbon in one bed, pausing to ask, am I too aggressive? Be decisive, not punitive, I said, and the soil forgave us both. 3 jokes to keep my lungs on their union shift. If soil tests had a dating app, they'd swipe right on Lomi with depth, hates drama. If stirrup hoes had a talk show, episode 1 would be Weed You Like to Dance. If instrument numbers were pets, mine would be a well-behaved goldfish named Book and Page. Around noon, Mrs. Peña arrived with a tray labeled not bribery, but try me and news, the block thread named the Beehive. It's clerk because it makes order happen. We clinked paper cups and pretended the bees nodded in Latin. Calvin rinsed the oscillating sprinkler and set it to whisper. The spray stitched the air without auditioning for power washer. He stayed off his phone with no one watching. which I plan to list under character compounded. A letter arrived from the county, a square, polite envelope that made my pulse practice patience. Inside code inspection closed. No violations. I pinned it above the stove like art and slid a copy into the red weld, spine first. As if the folder could feel pride. Asha emailed fraud alert confirmations for both of us and a flyer called Freeze. Unfreeze. Repeat without losing your dignity. The title alone lowered my blood pressure. In the afternoon, we did the math that keeps gardens and families from getting theatrical. The restitution ledger got a new line. Calvin sold the drone he didn't need. The bank captured the deposit. The sub-account titled Garden Repairs and Soil bought a delivery of compost that didn't pretend to be chocolate cake. We scheduled installment 2 in his calendar with 2 reminders. 1, 2 days early. 1, the morning of. He wrote the alerts in the down line of his notebook like a person building rails he intends to follow. At 4, I opened Henry's safe and took down the envelope labeled Garden Day Neighbors. We wrote invitations for a first pick and page turner's evening next month, herbs for anyone who shows up with a book to trade, lemonade and chairs, no speeches. Priya will bring a portable stamp for whoever wants to notarize an advance directive. Ray has promised to stop by without her badge and buy a cookie at, quote, retail. We are going to sneak adulthood into a party. Henry would have approved. My second intellectual aging event snuck into the shed when I asked Calvin for the little metal angle, the corner saver, bracket thing. My brain offered L-shape hugger poetic, useless before delivering angle bracket with a wink. I wrote L-shape hugger Elon angle bracket on the shed's dictionary card and signed it Mara V. Nouns 2025 for future amusement. By dusk, the garden had a pulse you could hear if you stood still and believed in chlorophyll. The peas grabbed twine with the entitlement of toddlers. The chard lifted its red veins like stained glass. The zinnias rehearsed for birthdays. The marigolds argued benevolently with mosquitoes. We watered apology into soil, which is what dusk is for. Calvin stayed to coil hoses in circles, not snakes, then stood, awkward and brave. Option B is working, he said. Keep it boring, I answered. He nodded. I texted Paige wrote through counsel and blocked her numbers. Receipts are love letters to future you, I said. And he smiled like a person who had finally read his own mail. We did one slow lap under a sky that has no interest in guardianship petitions. I touched the hatches, blue tape, sealed 627, and felt the numbers hum in the back of my head like a lullaby I no longer need to sing. Clerk Bees brought the day in for filing. The Commons corner held its chalk promise. The red welt rested like furniture, not armor. 3 last jokes for the pillow, so sleep knows the address. If gavels were real in most rooms, I'd still prefer the sound a clerk's stamp makes. If Exhibit C had a bumper sticker, it would read, Filled before feelings. If wheelbarrows wrote memoirs, the subtitle would be, What We Carried, Quietly. I flipped the tomato timer and slid 3 new cards beneath it. Path dependence. But choose your grooves. Repentance backs up with ledgers. Neighbors are policy with cookies. Then I turned off the lamps, left the fan on low to sow the room into something gentle, and let the garden keep watch. Somewhere a judge read a stack without adjectives. Somewhere Asha's alert system stretched, yawned, and kept one eye open. Somewhere a kid named Jaya practiced writing sun gold with a steadier hand. We are not finished. We have become our own procedure.